MechWarrior 3 was intended to be a home version of the BattleTech Tesla arcade pods, but when development ran long and every company involved imploded, Zipper Interactive hammered out the version of MechWarrior 3 we actually got in 1999. The original MechWarrior 3 was still in development by FASA Interactive, now under the umbrella of Microsoft Game Studios. In November of 2000, a year after the release of MechWarrior 3, this game was released as MechWarrior 4 Vengeance, using the modified Tesla pod engine, but not the art assets that had been used for MechWarrior 3. Now, right around the turn of the century, FASA was pretty much done. The BattleTech CCG that started in 1996 was on a hiatus that would become permanent in 2001, because FASA closed its doors. They didn't go out of business, but they saw their audience dwindling and opted to go out before the bankruptcy kicked in, which meant this was the last mech game released while FASA was operating. And depending on how you count, it was the last mech game released. Full stop. MechWarrior 4 could have been the swan song for the entire BattleTech franchise, but I'll finish this train of thought later. MechWarrior 4 Vengeance opens with the most awkward cinematic ever attached to a legitimate game. It's got the tragic ending, replete with the good guy going down swinging in a ball of fire, but with the addition of full motion video 10 years late to the party. If you think FMV in the year 2000 came a long way since 1990, it hasn't. The resolution and color depth is just peachy, but the B-movie acting, B-writing, and B-movie green screen is right where you left it in the tray of your Sega CD. Wow, that is some goddamn chroma keying right there. This intro contains killer dialogue like, "It's different now. Everything has changed," which is about the most content-free statement ever made. The cinematic actually prefaces the story again. It follows two mech pilots while they try to defend the Dressari Palace from the attacking forces of Katrina Steiner. As they move out down an empty stretch of road, they run into three LRMs spiraling aimlessly through the sky. It's like somebody dumb-fired a flight of missiles over a building and they're just sputtering out randomly. Karis, aka SIG-2, gets flattened by one missile. That's what happens when you min-max, dumbass. Keep the armor on, don't be a fucking scrub. Sigma Leader then engages a full lance of mechs by himself and gets predictably ruined. The intro is cornball to an obscene degree, but it's fun and it sets up the game very well. The plot itself is barely canon as usual, which is insane. What other licensed property has so many good games and still treats the stories contained therein so poorly? At least before Star Wars hit the great big reset button in the sky, every game was canon after a fashion. Imagine playing one of the great Star Wars games like Dark Forces 2, Jedi Knight, or KOTOR and being told, yeah, none of that happened, it was just Luke's fever dream while he was in the Bacta tank. They explained away the BattleTech animated series by saying it was an in-universe animated series about the fictionalized exploits of a real group of mercenaries, which makes it fake twice. In MechWarrior 4, you play as Ian Dressari, a Jeremy Renner-looking rich kid who is nonetheless hailed as a master tactician and veteran MechWarrior. After his family is mostly killed and partly deposed by Katrina Steiner, Ian and his sister Joanna swear to get their revengeance and fight a guerrilla war over the planet Kentaris 4. BattleTech faithful recognize Kentaris 4 as being the planet where some Karita forces massacred a bunch of civilians, and that's the only canon thing that happened there. The problem is, it's not really Katrina Steiner who takes over, but Ian's evil cousin William, who has an evil goatee. That's the caliber of storytelling we're dealing with here.
Cousin.
See, in the real BattleTech universe, Katrina Steiner seizes power from Victor Davion, and the Davion-Steiner alliance falls apart, leading to civil war in the Federated Commonwealth. The Dressari family remains loyal to Davion, but Goatee McMastermind is sympathetic to Steiner and helps them take over. This story doesn't even rate a sidebar in the life of Katrina Steiner. It's back to the inconsequential rich people B-plot of MechWarrior 1. At the very least, there's a strong narrative. It's just difficult to care about the characters in the story, and since you already know the events of the game won't have wider consequences in the BattleTech world, because they didn't happen, what's the point? MechWarrior 4 changed almost everything about the way MechWarrior looks and plays, and is arguably more polarizing than even Mech Assault. For my money, the changes were almost entirely good, with only minor exceptions. So let's get right into the controversy, shall we? MechWarrior 4 boasts a lineup of 21 mechs, omitting several classics and including some that are new to the game series entirely. The personality of the mech designs is just gone. They look less like mechs and more like mecha, which is also borne out in the faster and smoother movement. For whatever reason, I'm not a huge fan of the new mechs like the Uziel and the Argus. Call it age bias, but the Nova Cat and the Thanatos do nothing for me, even though the game fawns over them. And some of my old favorites have bizarre loadouts to fit the new hardpoint system, and usually if you customize them to match their official loadouts, they come out way underweight. Mech 4 also changes the way weapons work, again, so let's go through those those type by type. First is missiles. In MechWarrior 1, missile racks fired one big ol' fat missile that was probably representative of a flight of missiles from the tabletop game. Chalk that one up to technological limitations. In MechWarrior 2, they fired a stream of missiles all in one go, which I think is true to the tabletop game and looks awesome. In MechWarrior 3, the whole flight of missiles was fired in one big blob and would stay together in a group from launch to impact. MechWarrior 4 changes them yet again, and has long-range missile racks fire in flights of 5, so an LRM-20 fires 4 flights of 5 in rapid succession. SRMs fire in a stream of missiles like in MechWarrior 2. I'm pretty ambivalent about these changes. I guess if I had to choose, I'd pick the MechWarrior 2 style of missiles, but that might just be because I played it first. Where it gets interesting is with lasers. In Mech 2, lasers behaved more like colorful bullets made of light, and pulse lasers were the same but fired in bursts of 2 with a much faster refire rate. MechWarrior 3 is the only mech game where the lasers really made sense. Standard lasers were a quick hit-scan beam with no travel time, kind of like lasers are in an Einsteinian universe such as the one we live in. Pulse lasers behaved similarly but could be held on for a longer time, allowing you to sweep them across a target or focus them in one spot to build up damage. Perfection itself. MechWarrior 4 keeps this behavior of standard lasers, but pulse lasers are sort of back to being bullets like in Mech 2. This would be fine, except pulse lasers and machine guns fire in measured bursts. But every single shot hits exactly where the first one does, even if you and your target change positions after you fire. This happens with SRMs, machine guns, autocannon, and pulse lasers. What it really reminds me of is Spec Ops Rangers Lead the Way. It's just garbage. I'd say MechWarrior 3 had the best overall design in regards to the weapons, but I'd be curious to hear what your favorite approach to pulse lasers, autocannon, and missiles is. Another point of frustration is that there are so many clan mechs in the hands of Interspear organizations just years after the clan invasion. No way they could have salvaged so many mechs, and they definitely didn't buy them in such a short time. This applies to Pirates Moon and the whole Mech 4 trilogy, as well as Mech Assault to a lesser extent. It just doesn't scam. I get why they do it, since you don't fight clan enemies and they have to include those mechs somehow. The biggest change to the game, which is bafflingly non-canon and pisses a lot of people off, is the hardpoint system. In BattleTech and the previous games in the series, mechs had exactly the same space as each other, minus 1 or 2 criticals for hand or elbow joints. A 100-ton Atlas mech had exactly as much space for weapons as a 20-ton Hornet. Basically, each part of the mech was a huge empty hole you could cram weapons into, which is how the tabletop game works in theory, but not in practice. See, the idea of Omni-mechs is that they have empty pod space that any weapon can be slotted into. Now this is what the customization in Mech 2 and 3 really was. Every single mech was treated as an Omni-mech. MechWarrior 4 adds hardpoints that can accept certain types of weapons and Omni-hardpoints that function like the older empty holes. And this makes so much sense, it's ridiculous. A mech that normally mounts a huge autocannon on the arm can have it replaced with a different type of autocannon. The feed mechanism is there, it doesn't need any sort of hookups for eliminating waste coolant, it's already calibrated, no problem. Just slot another autocannon in there and it's cool. BattleTech Cannon has plenty of configurations that just trade in weight to upgrade weapons or swap out types of laser. There are configurations in the tabletop game that have totally different weapon loadouts, but those are almost always described as being scratch-built by the factory. Basically, they're an entirely different mech with different weapon hookups based on the same chassis. You can't do a field refit of a catapult into a catapult K2. MechWarrior 4's hardpoint system is perfect. It makes it so different chassis have their strengths and weaknesses. You can no longer place all of your weapons into the big empty torso holes, you have to put them where the weapon mounting actually is. Which isn't just more realistic, it also changes the combat a ton. 2 mechs of the same weight could be customized identically in previous games. The only thing that was different about them was their hitboxes in combat, some of which were clearly less broken than the others. In MechWarrior 4, a mech might be better at a specific role, and you can more easily identify what you might be dealing with just by looking at the mech. This also gives you more weak points to shoot at, like destroying a missile rack or picking off a heavily loaded arm. Each chassis can also mount varying amounts of jump jets and electronics, further differentiating them. All mechs have headlights for night missions, like in Pirates Moon, but now light amplification is an installable option on some chassis, making them better at night fighting. Some mechs are capable of being outfitted for electronic warfare, with Beagle active probes for longer radar range and faster target lock, or ECM to defeat enemy target lock and radar. The only thing that could make it better is a more defined damage system that doesn't treat arms and legs as single massive objects. Otherwise, this system is so brilliant I can't even begin to describe it. The whole game isn't brilliant, however it makes the engine change gracefully. Levels are huge and have diverse terrain, and the draw distance makes long-range engagements possible, for once. Level environments are also crammed full of buildings, civilian vehicles, and great details. They are also scattered with the sprites of animals and people, which look like pixelated garbage. And they're invincible. Mech 3 had little 3D dudes running around and you could blast them into pieces. The sprites aren't even well animated, and they can only run in diagonal directions. They look awful, and they should have left them out. Mech 4's other controversial party piece is how fast the mechs move. They don't exactly behave like mechs. Mech 3 balanced the maneuverability with the feeling of weight. MechWarrior 4 has the mechs feel less like massive machines and more like big guys running around killing each other. At least the mechs don't float around like in MechWarrior 2, and the foot physics are just as good as they are in Mech 3. The speed of the game does have an upshot. Your mouse controls aren't as precise as they were in Mech 3 because you don't control the arms of the mech with the mouse, you control the torso, like in Mech 2. Less precise mouse aim plus faster moving mechs means it's harder to get a lock on light mechs at range. LRMs are a lot less broken than they were in MechWarrior 3. The faster mech movement doesn't really translate to faster combat, however. Mechs seem like they can take an absurd amount of punishment, so you'll dump salvo after salvo of PPCs into their rear center torso and they just never die. Or you'll pelt a scout mech with a dozen flights of missiles from an LRM-20 and it barely does a scratch. In MechWarrior 2, an LRM-20 could wipe out a smaller mech in 1 or 2 volleys. You could rake a pulse laser across a Jenner and watch him go up like he was armored with Duraflame. Combat in MechWarrior 4 seems to drag on. More precise hit detection and higher armor values does finally mean mechs don't shed their arms in the first 8 picoseconds of combat, so you can actually put weapons in the arms. The changes to the gameplay are hit or miss, but Mech 4's clearest miss is the story. Like MechWarrior 1, it's personal on the surface, but that doesn't make me invested in it. Vaguely attractive 20-something main characters stumble awkwardly through their scenes with a lot of really off-putting head movements. What is this? On occasion you intercept enemy communications, which are transmitted to you in shot-reverse shot like a fucking soap opera. The villains are embarrassing cartoons, scarfing scenery left and right even in private conversations. Before every mission, you get bombarded with a procession of cutscenes while all of your companions weigh in on the situation. Sometimes you have to get through 4 or 5 of these before anybody even mentions the next mission objective. It is cool that you have multiple lancemates to choose from, and they all have different reactions to the events and missions. However, the missions themselves are compelling. They boast a wide variety of objective types, tons of vehicles, bases, and aircraft for that combined arms feel I love so much, and backstory with sensible logistics a la MechWarrior 2. Most levels leave me feeling a bit fatigued, since mechs can take so much damage and you fight more mechs per mission than in any other MechWarrior game. But the frequent convoy capture missions and base assaults gives that good tactical gameplay that keeps you coming back for more. Some of the coolest missions are dropship assaults, since dropships are far more dangerous than ever before. Taking them out involves making it past defending vehicles and mechs, taking out the APU trucks, resupplying the dropship, and then firing at the engines while avoiding a barrage of PPC and Gauss rifle shots. The voice acting is okay, the sound effects are pretty good, but the soundtrack is an improvement over the last few games. I love MechWarrior 3 as much as the next guy, but the music was a low point for the franchise. Mech 3 had a grand total of 6 minutes of music split between 2 3-minute tracks of atonal ambience. Pirate's Moon had one 9-minute music track with 3 equal-length movements, one of which was truly epic and the other 2 of which were more atonal screeches as performed by a cat on a synthesizer. Now, let's talk collecting and the box. Here it is. Look at that, the box. MechWarrior 4 is from the last of the halcyon days of the PC big box and has pretty good cover art with a new Zeal shooting you in the face. The box art isn't on the level of MechWarrior 3, but then again nothing is, except maybe Daikatana. I like this little band of art with a badass Mad Cat Mark II steadfastly refusing to acknowledge the explosion behind him. It also has a bunch of unarmed soldiers failing to contribute meaningfully to the battle. What are they doing? The tank has this handled. What can they accomplish without weapons? Opening up the gatefold reveals another Uziel. I get it, you like this mech. Nobody else does. The inside art is like an in-engine recreation of the cover art. There's a Mad Cat silhouetted by an explosion and the Uziel in the same pose. They just forgot to use the Mad Cat Mark II. They put an actual in-game footage note on the spread to assure you that yes, the game does really look this good. Of the 7 new mechs, the only one I don't hate is the Mad Cat Mark II, which doesn't really count because it's just a chunky Timberwolf. Inside the box is the game on 2 CDs, which took an eternity to install in 2000, and a reference card. There's also a great manual with some handwritten notes like Mech 2 and 3. It's a good gimmick. There are notes from Ian's father and some from him responding to them. Some of the notes are pretty good. Still haven't found a good use for flamers. Yeah, tell me about it. The description of the Atlas notes it causes mech warriors to break out in hives, because I guess they're allergic to fear. This is an ongoing joke. Every MechWarrior game has something else to say about the effect of the Atlas on a MechWarrior. As for playing the game, it will basically run on any system. I've tested it on Windows 98 all the way up through Windows 10, and it installs and runs just fine. MechWarrior 4 takes a lot of flack for being so different from MechWarrior 3 and prior games. I think the mech customization system was brilliant, the squad control was nice, though not really much better than before, and the combat is very fluid. Most of all, MechWarrior 4 works. Vengeance is the first mech game since MechWarrior 2 to feel like a complete, polished project. Call that the Microsoft seal of quality. I'd recommend it, but I might also recommend that you skip straight to MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries, for reasons that I'll get to in that episode. But first, Black Knight. Next time.
Okay. Control, this is Omega Lead. Looks like they're away.
Roger, Omega. Break off and avoid all Steiner units.